Write it once, run it everywhere. Learn how to create stored procedures in SQL that you or your users can call from anywhere with their own parameters. Think of a stored procedure like it's a container inside which you can store a SQL query that you know works and generates an important set of data that is valuable to your executives. But imagine that the filters inside the SQL query can be passed by the user that's calling the stored procedure. So let's take a look at the procedure that we have on the screen right now. The syntax begins with create or replace procedure and then the procedure name, which is top selling products in this case. Then in the first parentheses, we accept the parameters that will be passed by the user when calling this procedure. In this case, we are accepting the start date, the end date, and the top end products that we want to pull between this date range based on quantity and revenue. The next step is to define the returns table, which is the table definition of the resultant set that will be provided to the user when they call this procedure. You must also define the data type of each of these fields that will be generated in the resultant set. Then you specify the language of the procedure that you're going to write it in. In this case, we are writing it in SQL. Then you declare the resultant set inside a variable called res. Then we begin writing the SQL query and we assign the SQL query that we write inside this variable res. The SQL query starts with a basic select where we select the product name, the brand name, the sum of the quantity sold, the sum of the quantity multiplied with the list price to generate the total revenue, the start date, and the end date. Now this start date and end date is being passed by the user, and therefore we declare it with a colon in the beginning. Multiple database systems have different syntax, but they're pretty similar. So for example, in MySQL Server, it will be @. In this case, since it's Snowflake, we are using a colon. Then we specify the table in the from query, and then we specify all our joins that we need to pull the data that we are pulling in the select. Then we specify the where query of the select statement, where we mention that the order date must be between the start date and the end date that was passed by the user. Then we group the entire select query by the product name and the brand name, and then we order it by the total quantity in the descending order, since we are trying to find the top end products by quantity and revenue generated. Then we limit the entire resultant set by the top end parameter, which is the top end products parameter that was passed by the user, based on whether the user wants to pull the top 10 products, the top 5 products, or the top 3 products. And then we return the table that we generated inside of the res variable. And then we finally end the entire procedure. Now it's time to finally call the procedure. So you select the call command, you mention the start date and the end date and the top end products you want to pull in the date range based on the revenue and the quantity, and then you run it. And there you go. You get the resultant set exactly as you defined it. You get the total quantity sold. You get the revenue within the date range that you specified in your input parameters. And this can be called from anywhere, and you can put it in any interface that you want.